And so first up, I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and celebrate the diversity of all Aboriginal peoples and their continuing connection to land, water and community. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people online with us today. Thanks again for the introduction and the invitation to bring you up to speed on what the National Skills Commission has been doing in the past 12 months, as well as give you a flavour of what is to come. So the National Skills Commission, or the NSC, as I think we've sort of come to be known, has a bold vision to shape Australia's future workforce. And we're doing this by providing advice on current labour market conditions. But importantly, we're also looking forward at emerging and future workforce skills needs, and how the economy and importantly the skills system can help the country to meet those skills needs. So having been established a bit over a year ago, our work has already had an impact, looking at how we can help people affected by the economic shock of COVID-19. So, for example, our data and our analysis help to identify which courses would be funded under the government's Job Trainer program, which was designed to target the areas that would help drive our post-COVID-19 recovery. Our work in the vet sector is ramping up quickly and is also bringing some new and really fascinating data into the mix. So we're in the process of assessing which courses provide the best outcomes for students, for industry and for government, as well as developing advice on what is a fair price for students and for government to pay training providers to produce high quality vet graduates. Ultimately, our work will help produce candidates that have the right skills, support both public and private investment in the vet sector, and provide confidence to students about their study and career pathways. I'll go into more detail on the work that we're doing in the vet sector shortly, but first I wanted to give you a brief overview of the NSC and the entirety of what we do. So establishing the NSC was one of the recommendations of the expert review of Australia's education and training system, conducted by Stephen Joyce in 2019. While we became official in July last year, we were on the job a bit sooner than that, producing important analysis around the economic shock of COVID-19 and its impact on the labour market. As you can see from this timeline, we issued 3 major reports last year, and there's a further 4 already out this year. Plus the Australian Skills Classification, and a new task, a review into the care workforce, which is currently underway. I've mentioned the NSC vision already, which is to shape Australia's future workforce. Supporting that, we have 3 long-term objectives. First, to make an enduring and relevant contribution to labour market information. Second, to improve the quality, accessibility and relevance of vocational education and training. And third, to contribute to a labour market that effectively aligns skills needs with education and training. We've set these objectives to guide us in ensuring that our work contributes to a strong Australian economy that has the right skills at the right time. So how do we go about meeting those objectives? Well, there are 3 main areas of research and activity that the Commission busies itself with. So the first is through labour market research and workforce analysis. So you might be familiar with some of the outputs that we've got on the slide here, and that includes our monthly releases of data from surveys of employers through the Recruitment Experiences and Outlook Survey, or REOS, as well as the survey of employers who have recently advertised, SERA. Looking at that data, we can see that in May, 51% of employers surveyed were currently recruiting or had recruited in the past month, up 2% since April. Some 53% of employers, so half of those employers who were recruiting, reported that they experienced recruitment difficulty, due mainly to either a lack of applicants or a lack of suitable applicants. At the same time, 21% of employers surveyed expected to increase their staffing levels in the next 3 months. And I understand that shortages in filling apprenticeships and traineeships are a recurring theme for group training organisations as well. Obviously, we'd like to be able to say that there's a quick fix around the corner, but everyone in the room would know that there's no such thing as a quick fix, particularly in the current context, where I guess we find ourselves with a pretty fortunate set of challenges around a strong recovering labour market and continuing restrictions on migration. What I can say is that some of the research that we are currently working on should help support the work being done in the VET system, because it will show more clearly the ways that completing a VET course impacts a person's life. But we'll cover that a little bit later on in the presentation. The NSC also publishes the most detailed data on economy-wide job vacancies in Australia, and we do that through a publication called the Internet Vacancies Index, or IVI. So, for example, in May, job ads in the IVI Index showed that job ads continued to increase, reaching their highest level in over 12 years across all occupational groups, as well as all skill level groups. Job ads increased across all states and territories, except Tasmania, where recruitment activity declined only slightly by 1%. The strongest increases that we saw were in Queensland, where there was a 6.4% increase, South Australia, a 4.5% increase, and Western Australia, a 4.4% increase. What we're seeing now through IVI is that the number of job ads is higher than before COVID-19 across all 48 detailed occupational groups. The NSC also has responsibility for regularly reviewing the national skills needs of Australia and producing an annual skills priority list. The first version of this list is being finalised as we speak. It will help policymakers understand the skills needs of the Australian economy, including occupations that are in shortage, and the strength of demand of those occupations, whether that's strong, moderate or weak, over the coming 5-year period. We expect that list to be used to inform policy responses in areas such as skilled migration, training funding decisions, as well as decisions for incentives for employers, including those of employers of apprentices and trainees. So keep an eye on the NSC website, especially over the next week or so, for this first version of the skills priority list. Since the establishment of the NSC, there's been understandably an intense interest in the labour market and what the future may hold for Australia's economy, especially in regards to the pandemic. Our research has found that the pandemic has accelerated some trends that were already underway, including the continued transition to a services-based economy from manufacturing, a technological transition leading to more automation, an ageing population leading to more jobs in healthcare and social assistance, and emerging jobs in industries such as information technology and renewable energy. Our report on the industry employment outlook to 2025 bears this out. It projects that 4 industries are likely to generate 65% of total employment growth over 5 years to November 2025. They are healthcare and social assistance, increasing by nearly 250,000 jobs, accommodation and food services, professional scientific and technical services, and education and training. As I mentioned earlier, all of these factors point to a growth in higher skilled jobs, and our predictions indicate that around about 93% of new jobs in the next 5 years will require either a VET or a university qualification. And it's just worth pointing out before I move on to the next set of slides that in April, job ads for community and personal service workers hit their highest level since January 2006 at 29,600. This is one of the areas where demand is going to continue and continue to increase, and it's an area where we're focusing our research at the moment. In early March, the Commission was tasked with undertaking an in-depth study on the factors affecting the supply and demand of care workers in the near term and the longer term, so looking out to 2050. The study is examining the needs of the care and support workforce in relation to aged care, disability care, veteran care and mental health care. We've been taking submissions which closed last week, and we'll be providing a report to the Minister by the end of September. So that's an overview of the busy work that our labour market research area is engaged with. And I'll turn now to talk about some of the more exciting and innovative work that we're doing in the forecasting skills and analysis branch. So this branch is working hard to understand how the underlying skills that drive the work we do is changing existing jobs, as well as leading to the creation of new ones. Our flagship data engine, we have called the Jobs and Education Data Infrastructure Project, or JEDI. And like JEDI Knights, it's a powerful and real-time tool that brings together a broad range of data. JEDI's intelligence allows us to tailor support for a broad range of groups by, firstly, informing individuals about their career pathways and their education options. Supporting education providers to design courses and qualifications that align with what the labour market needs. Helping businesses identify what skills staff need now and in the future to assist with their workforce planning. And assisting governments to improve the targeting of programs to the regions and the groups most in need. JEDI also links skills data to help people find employment and training opportunities. It shows people jobs in their local areas, which are the jobs that require their skill sets, and it tracks the needs of our ever-changing economy to anticipate what skills and jobs we will need in the future. We hope to launch new applications with JEDI data to help a variety of users, but here are two examples that are already live on the Department of Education Skills and Employment website. The first is called Job Switch, and it's an online tool that assists job seekers to find a job that they already have the skills for. What the tool does is help job seekers explore similar jobs to the jobs that they've done before, and it helps them identify training options that will allow them to bridge any skills gaps that they might have. It then connects them to positions in their local area that they can apply for. Jobs Hub is another tool that likewise helps individuals identify jobs in demand in their local area that match their skills. Another project that JEDI has made possible is the new Australian Skills Classification, which we released in beta form in March. With it, we are changing the idea of how we define skills to one which looks at skills rather than occupations, job titles, or qualifications, which have traditionally been used as proxies for skills in analysis and design. This is a paradigm shift in the way that we view the labour market. What the classification does is deconstructs 600 occupations using the ANSCO framework into 3 areas: core competencies, specialist tasks, and technology tools. Let me address each one of these separately. So the 10 core competencies are the types of things that are common to all jobs. You might know them as soft skills, and they're things such as teamwork, problem solving, literacy, and numeracy. A 2019 survey conducted by the NSC found that 75% of employers considered employability skills to be as important, if not more important, than technical skills. And analysis by the economic consultancy Alpha Beta also found that these kinds of skills to be the fastest growing in the labour market. The World Economic Forum found that the top skills employers see as important in the lead up to 2025 include critical thinking, analysis and problem solving skills, alongside skills in self-management, such as active learning, resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. But the skills classification doesn't just focus on generic skills. It also looks in detail at specialist tasks. And these are the work activities that a person undertakes which are specific to a particular job. The ASC identifies nearly 1,925 specialist tasks, which change more frequently than core competencies. and they play an important role in differentiating occupations. We also identified 88 technology tools. These are the technologies, such as software or hardware, that are required in a particular occupation. So with those elements, specialist tasks, core competencies, and technology tools, we look at how, using job ads, we look at how they are clustered and combined in different ways across the labour market to determine what a cluster of skills typically looks like. So what that has enabled us to do is identify skills clusters which are similar to one another, even where the descriptions of the jobs themselves might be different. What that means is that if you can do one task in a skills cluster, it's likely that you can do the others. And so in other words, the classification enables a more systematic way of thinking about transferable skills. The benefit of this granular view is to help employers to be less constrained by job titles and drill down more closely into what is actually required for a job. It also expands the possibility for job seekers by clearly identifying skills that are transferable across occupations. As I mentioned earlier, we released the classification in March. It's still in beta version, and we're very happy to receive feedback on the classification, which can be found on the NSC website. The third area of focus for the NSC is vet pricing and performance. And I'll focus on this in detail for the rest of the presentation, as I know it's of particular interest to many of you, and it's also the area of responsibility for me at the Commission. So we know that Australia's current, emerging and future workforce skills needs will rely on a high-performing vet system. At times, the system can be complex and unresponsive, especially for those who rely on it the most, our students. The task the Australian government has given the NSC is to develop and maintain a set of efficient prices for vet courses through examining the cost drivers for courses and the different public and private returns from vet study. I'm able to share some of the findings from our recent report on average prices for subsidised vet courses across the country, and talk in a bit more detail about the work we are doing to develop a national framework for efficient prices. I'm also able to talk a bit more about a new data set that we're developing called the Vet National Data Asset, that will link vet activity data to outcomes data held by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. The inconsistencies in how vet prices, fees and subsidies are set across the country are well known, and they were among the key findings of both the Joyce Review and the recent Productivity Commission's report into the National Agreement for Skills and Workforce Development. As a first step towards a more nationally consistent pricing framework, the NSC has developed indicative average price benchmarks, which we published in March. And I'll go into this in a bit more detail on the next slide. We're currently focused on developing a national pricing framework for vet courses based on the efficient cost of delivery. It's important to emphasise that when we talk about efficient prices, we're not talking about the lowest possible price. What efficiency means is that the price that needs to be paid to secure training that delivers students with the skills employers need and sets students up for a valuable career. In other words, quality is a central consideration when we look at what the efficient price should be. As a future stage, what we'd like to be able to do is bring in our work on outcomes and incorporate that into our recommendations on which courses should be funded and by how much. The development of our average price benchmarks include the first national collection of information on vet qualification subsidies, fees and prices across Australia. The data we collected in 2020 confirms that there is substantial variation in fees and subsidies, and therefore total prices for vet qualifications across Australia, even for a standard government-funded student studying exactly the same qualification. And in that regard, I'm probably telling you something that you're all well aware of already. But what we were able to do was start to put some numbers and some figures around this for the first time. So what we found is that typically the average price for a vet qualification is $7,700. And where I talk about price here, I mean the student fee component and the government subsidy component together. So for a Certificate 3, the average was $9,200, and for a diploma, we found that it was $12,000. Now, across all qualifications, we found that students paid 13% of the total price for an apprenticeship or a traineeship, or nearly a quarter, 24%, for a non-apprenticeship or traineeship qualification. But the range is large, from 0 to 62% for an apprenticeship or traineeship, and from 0% to 72% for students who are not studying that qualification as part of an apprenticeship or traineeship. We observed varying prices for students accessing the same qualification in different jurisdictions. And this is the detail that we've included on this slide. So on average, the difference is over $3,000. And in many cases, it exceeds $10,000, where we were able to observe more than one jurisdictional price. We also found that there are even larger differences when we looked at average prices across the same field of education or qualification level. Again, we commonly saw price differences in excess of $10,000. This is a busy chart. There's a lot in it, but what it shows is the variation in total price paid at the provider and qualification level for a group of popular qualifications. This variation happens across the board, even for popular qualifications, where you would expect a lot of demand, a lot of providers, and a lot of perhaps consistency in pricing. So qualifications like the Certificate 3 in individual support or the Certificate 3 in plumbing. Here we can see very clearly that the average price in the most expensive state or territory can be more than twice the state or territory with the lowest average price. And these differences exist despite all jurisdictions basing their subsidies predominantly on the cost of delivery and similarities in approaches to calculating cost. This leads us to the importance of the work that the NSC is undertaking on efficient pricing. We're developing a set of national efficient prices to improve the transparency and consistency of the vet system and reduce the complexity of prices, fees and subsidies for vet courses. We think there is room to achieve this while still preserving a lot of autonomy for states and territories in the way that they run their vet systems to respond to local conditions. The framework will be based on the efficient cost of providing training, as well as taking into account existing prices, an appropriate margin for providers, and the range of local factors that can lead to variation in the demand for courses and the cost of delivery across Australia. The development of efficient prices could assist students and businesses to make more informed decisions about what training to undertake, based on a clear understanding of what prices, fees and subsidies are for the different courses. It will help RTOs to benchmark their operations against national cost data and improve their business planning and investment decision making. And for all users and stakeholders, we hope to be able to reduce complexity and avoid potential distortions through a more consistent set of prices, fees and subsidies. The information that we're gathering on efficient prices will be shared with the Australian Government and with state and territory governments, as well as RTOs, so that they can benchmark their operations and improve their business planning. We've been consulting widely on the development of efficient prices, and we've established a pricing working group with representatives from the states and territories, which meets regularly. In fact, we met with the states and territories on Friday to provide an update on where we were at with the estimation of average prices. We've consulted with RTOs and peak bodies about the design of the efficient costing study and the cost collection instrument. And we've engaged with a mix of public and private RTOs from every state and territory to collect cost data and estimate prices for nearly 500 qualifications. We're currently working with the states and territories through the pricing working group we've established to take on board their feedback and refine our approach. By the end of the year, we hope to have developed efficient prices for all government subsidised qualifications. We've also started work on the VET National Data Asset, which will link VET activity data to outcomes data held by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. The impacts of education and training on a person's life can only be observed after the training has ended, and sometimes not for many years afterwards. So disentangling the effects of training from other factors, such as the student's aptitude, their attitude, their background characteristics, where they live, as well as general community and economic effects, requires careful use of statistical techniques. The team at the Commission, in collaboration with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, is developing a methodology called a risk-adjusted methodology to take account of these very complicated and interdependent relationships. We're developing the methodology, we're seeking advice from external experts, and we'll look to refine the methodology further based on stakeholder feedback and expert input. And in fact, we've just launched some consultation with the sector around the development of risk-adjusted indicators for the sector. Developing these indicators, getting them right, and getting them to the point where everyone across the sector is comfortable with what they're trying to do and how they do it, will be particularly important to ensure that the results focus on the value add of training. That is, what does a good course actually contribute to an individual's life above and beyond what they would have been able to accomplish anyway. This is groundbreaking analysis, and I'm sure everyone will be watching and waiting for the first results from this work, which we expect to release towards the end of this year. That brings me to the end of the presentation, and I hope that you all have a greater understanding of the work that the NSC is undertaking to help align Australia's VET system with our current, future and emerging skills needs. By finding innovative ways to more accurately and rapidly identify Australia's skill needs, and then sharing that information with students, workers, employers, group training organisations, RTOs, we hope we can help foster better decisions about which courses to develop, which courses to offer and fund and enrol in. A nationally consistent, efficient pricing framework has the potential to promote more transparency, consistency and simplicity in prices, fees and subsidies. But our work at the National Skills Commission has just begun, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you and with other stakeholders on how we can bring this ambition to life. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Damien. That was fantastic. We've enabled everyone's microphones. If they want to turn them on, they can, to ask a question. Alternatively, you can post the question in the chat room if you like. Damien, I have a couple of questions for you.
Shoot.
One is around the Australian Jobs report that you put out earlier in the year. So this has been an annual report that's gone on for quite a number of years, and this is probably the first time in my memory that construction wasn't listed in the top 4 or 5 industries in terms of jobs needs and forecasts going forward. I think it was at certain states. I know in Victoria it was listed as an industry in need, but nationally it wasn't. So that's quite a significant shift. Obviously, health, education, sort of that professional scientific services is looks like it's got a greater demand than construction for the first time in a long time. Is there any, my question is there any sort of work being done behind the scenes about linking those job forecasts to qualifications so people can actually see what qualification they're going to need to enter that workforce?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So I think as you said, the Australian Jobs report is something that has been around for quite a while. And so when the Commission was created, we sort of took some existing areas of what was in the department, including some of those labour market areas, and combined them with some new areas around the VET system, which is the area that I'm leading. So a lot of the tools that we're seeking to develop, particularly through JEDI, is about helping people much more directly see those links between where jobs are and where and what skills and what qualifications will lead to those jobs. And taking that analysis to the next level, right? So as you're saying, the kind of broad headline figure around construction might be that it's still growing, but not as fast as some of the other areas. But construction, along with all sectors, has happening within it those trends that I talked about in the presentation. You know, increased automation, changes to job roles. All of that means that there are qualifications. That vet training for the construction sector is going to be as important, as much of a focus for the future of the industry as it has been up until this point. So we're looking to make sure that we work with some of the others across government and outside government, particularly the National Careers Institute, to develop those tools so that the data that we're developing around, say, things like the skills classification and job outlook are really focused on helping students, potential apprentices, job seekers understand what training needs will help them in particular, either keep their job, get a new job, or set themselves up for success later on.
All right. I guess the second part to my question is then how do we link that back to the skills priority lists and those sorts of things to, I guess, track what the future forecasts are, and also then going back and looking at historically how accurate we were in those forecasts as we progress.
Yeah, look, I think it's great to hear you mention this. Mention the going back and re-examining the accuracy of our forecasts. I think it's so often not done, and when you do it, it's a big reality check on the science. I think what you'll see is when the skills priority list is published in the next week or so, we're really conscious of that, and so the way that you'll see the skills priority list depicted shows a lot more awareness that there's not a single rating, there's not a kind of single number that is going to capture the full range of information and decision making that needs to be made about skills demand. So we're talking about in our assessment of occupations and the labour market, we're saying what are the future growth prospects, but also what's happening now, what's happening in different states and territories, what's happening in regional Australia versus metropolitan Australia, so that rather than coming out with a single rating or a single number, plumbers will grow by 40,000 in the next 5 years, and that means everything. Providing everyone who's interested in the work that we're doing, and we know that it's going to be used by a lot of stakeholders, both within government and outside it, that we're giving them as much information as possible to reflect the fact that people are are most interested in different aspects of what's happening in the demand for different jobs.
Yeah. Again, I think when I look at the big picture results, we probably need another 1 million workers over the next 5 years. I'm just not sure where we're going to find another.
Where we're going to find them. Exactly. Yeah.
And then obviously some industries are going to be in more demand than others in terms of their growth. So yeah, it's interesting work that you're doing, but again, it's how do we start to pull that back into some of the other priorities from our perspective. Yeah. All right. People are able to turn on their mics if they've got any specific questions. I haven't seen any pop up. James has got a question. Go for it, James.
I haven't. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Damien. Thanks for the presentation. And firstly, can I congratulate you on having the acronym JEDI? I'm sure the Star Wars fans there were very excited about that one. But my question is in terms of one of the challenges around skills lists and the areas of demand. We obviously our providers, the Drive and businesses. But the issue about young people and their interest in these areas is always the one that seems to be not quite lost, because I know we've been doing some work with the National Careers Institute about understanding, broadening the issues around young people who don't quite know what they don't quite know. And when you've got such large areas where they may not actually know what the role exists. So in thinking about that, yep, there's an area for demand, but if young people don't have an interest in it, then the likelihood. So what's your thinking around how you start to get that sort of that amalgamated much more effectively than I think we have in the past.
Yeah, thanks for your question, James. So look, great to hear that you're working with the National Careers Institute. We spend a lot of time working with them in a way. It's a bit of a crude analogy, but they're a bit of our kind of our retail arm in terms of how we think about how we're going to translate a lot of the data that we're doing, and a lot of our work directly involves dealing with states and territories, dealing with registered training organisations. But really, it's the NCI that's got that mandate around how do we engage people, particularly young people, around where their future employment opportunities are going to lie. So I think we see our role at the NSC as making sure that we're providing the information that will help our partners like the NCI develop tools that will give young people the ability to see things in different ways, and to increase their awareness about jobs that they might not be familiar with, either because they're new and rapidly emerging, or because for reasons they're not traditionally seen as female occupations, for example. There's lots of reasons why people aren't necessarily thinking in the broadest terms about what job opportunities are best for them, and then what training opportunities are there to support them.
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, I have another question for Damien while people are thinking of some themselves. With regards to the vet pricing, Damien, obviously you're going to need some sort of level of commitment from states, and also there can be some variables in terms of what those qualifications look like in various states. So again, it's just probably being a little bit mindful if you're promoting this is the cost of the course and these are the outcomes you should be expecting. In some states like Victoria, I know the plumbing training package has a lot more in it than it will in other states for the same qualification. You've got to go through 4 streams of the qualification. In some states, you might only have to go through 1 or 2. Is there going to be any consideration about how that information is shared?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and this is kind of the point where we're at with the states and territories at the moment. As I said, they're really a key partner in this work. The nature of the vet system and the way that it works, and the discussions around a new national skills agreement mean that if the states and territories aren't willing to sign up, then it's not going to happen. So understanding what the current lay of the land is absolutely critical to our work, and then looking for ways to accommodate those differences where we need to. So discussions with the states and territories are ongoing around that. So we actually, as I mentioned earlier, we had a session with them on Friday where we went through prices and fee and subsidy, draft fee and subsidy rates for around about 500 qualifications. And that was one of the issues that's come up. So when we talk about a national price and then a national pricing framework, we're quite clear, and we think we've kind of come with the states and territories so that they're much clearer, that doesn't mean that the same price will be paid for a qualification in every location across Australia, because there are legitimate factors that introduce variation, whether that's around the location or the student needs, and so on. So there's a couple of elements, even though we're looking to develop for each qualification a standard price, that's for a set of standard conditions. And then we'll be allowing effectively bands to operate, and for work with states and territories to determine where in that band the price should sit, given the location, given the student characteristics, but also things like the example you pointed out. So for plumbing, for electrotechnology, where there are licensing requirements imposed by different state governments that lead to a material impact in the cost of delivery.
I think that's important because some of those qualifications in terms of their student contact hours can vary quite significantly.
Absolutely. Look, and we know that contact hour element is a big driver of differences in costs across the sector. different considerations around workplace requirement, work placement requirements, and as well as just the cost of delivery for an apprentice and trainee mode of delivery versus standard mode. All of these factors we're working through. We're collecting data where we can. We're testing the results, and we're feeding back to states and territories to try and get a model that makes sense as we move forward.
So is the ultimate goal in this space for the Commonwealth to set the price for the student contact hours for the RTOs?
We're not that far yet. So I don't think that it certainly wouldn't be for the NSC to kind of in the process of setting a price, be prescriptive about hours of delivery, but ultimately it's something that we have to take into account when we're setting a price. And but it will be most likely looking at a range of hours to determine whether or not the price and the accompanying bands that we've set are appropriate and cover that range of scenarios. Because ultimately, whatever the ultimate agreement, assuming there is an agreement between the states and territories, looks like, it's still going to preserve a lot of autonomy for the states in terms of how they run their systems and their contracting arrangements. And so a lot of the decisions around hours are going to be bound up in that. But we know that there are other external factors for some particularly important qualifications, those around the licensed trades where we do have those external impacts. So absolutely, we'll be taking account of those factors when we're setting prices for those qualifications.
Thanks. I see Tony Watson's got his hand up. Go for it, Tony.
Yes, hello, Oliver. Thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. My question relates to the Australian skills classification. And how would that impact on traineeships and apprenticeships, which are currently identified by completing a qualification? So how is that going to, if that rolls out, how would that impact on traineeships and apprenticeships in the future?
Sure. Thanks for your question, Tony. So the skills classification, at this point, it's an analysis tool. So we're using that to help think differently and think in different ways about jobs and skills. So we wouldn't. I don't think we've got as far as saying that we would apply the skills classification as a kind of policy tool for making decisions about things. What the ASC could do in relation to apprenticeships and traineeships is give someone who's completed an apprenticeship or a traineeship, just as it can help someone who's completed any qualification, look at the skills that they have and say, you know what, you've trained, you've done a traineeship in medical administration, but actually the skills that you've got might suit you to roles in finance, or might suit you to roles in direct care. So it's about helping people to understand the underlying skills that they have as a result of their training or as a result of their work experience, and have a fresh look at what other jobs that might actually allow them to move into.
Thanks, Damien. We've got time for another question or two if anyone's got one. No, we're all good. Damien, look, we really appreciate you spending the time this morning with us to give us an update. There's certainly a lot of work going on in your department, and the next sort of 12 to 18 months are going to be fairly critical, I guess, in terms of getting the states on board and moving forward with some of the data. We will be able to share this presentation and the recording with delegates at the end of the week. We'd just like to thank you, Damien, for your time and efforts today.
No, it's been great to join you all. Wish you all the best for the rest of the conference.